Hello, fellow Rebel Capitals. Hope you're well. So we're going to give this another shot. We got the technical difficulties out of the way. Like I was saying earlier, I want to bring some guests onto the show, some experts that can give you insights into potentially investing in Argentina. We know what happened with the election. So this begs the question, are they going to go through an economic boom? Are they going to go through an economic bust? Could this be an investment opportunity of a lifetime? And the guy that is the best in this space, that not only has a lot of experience managing money and making a lot of money, but also has a lot of experience with Argentina. So, Chris MacIntosh, welcome to the show, buddy. I first want you to kind of give us the backstory on when you started investing in Argentina and why, and then you can tell us your thoughts on the election and kind of what might play out in the future.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me back, George. Argentina's been interesting. We got involved in October of 2021. This was before Milei was in the cards. Really, nobody was really paying too much attention to a looming election that was some years out. There were two reasons why we got involved, right? One was, I think, just more domestically based. You have or had valuations that were really, really attractive.
Okay.
That it's like my friend Cuppy likes to say, sometimes you can make the biggest amount of money when a place goes from shitty to not so shitty, as opposed to anything amazing, right?
I always
And
say that. In fact, what I used to say, Chris, I used to say, and I learned this from Jim Rogers. He had another way to say it, but I remember I used to say something like, "You make the most money when stuff goes from horrible to bad." Where most people think you make the most money when things go from good to great.
yeah,
Always make more money when things go from horrible to bad.
well, I think there's two inflection points. Like when you have that horrible to not so horrible situation, that and then your tail end, which is your hyper, when things are just going nuts. You think about the dot coms, you know,
Yeah.
where and you just get look. We saw it in crypto. You've seen it in many markets, and it's a blow off top.
Yeah, riding
Um,
that bubble.
but that side, your risk equation is completely different
Mm.
to like, for example, where we got invested. Um, because your risk is relatively low. Again, we were looking at valuations which are 2-3 times PEs, and
Wow.
then also where you go, okay, how much worse can it get? I guess it can go to 1, like, so you lose half your money, but it's not like the dot coms where you've got these valuations which are, I don't know, 120 times earnings or something. And it can easily lose 80% of its value and still be really ridiculously, stupidly expensive.
Right.
So um, so we had that taking place. But then look, Argentina's been cheap for a long time. But what we started seeing something in the charts, which, and we're not particularly chartists, but over time you gain almost like, I guess, an instinct for seeing. Look, we're pattern recognizing animals as human beings. And so we started seeing something looked like it was potentially taking place. That, combined with the fact we had valuations which were at extremely low valuations, led us into that market. The other thing that was kind of interesting at the time, you remember we had Brazilian elections, and Brazilian elections were kind of spicy, right? You had it wasn't just a typical election. There were people in the streets. There was a bit of violence. There was uh, um, yeah. It was a somewhat of a different election, if you will. Now, if you're an asset manager and you're putting money into, say, South America, and there's plenty of asset managers out there that have got a mandate whereby they have to invest into certain countries, sectors, and so on and so forth. If you are in that bucket where you're a South American or even emerging market type of investor, and you've got your allocations towards South America, easily the biggest market was Brazil. So you have Brazil, basically there's Brazil, Argentina, and Chile. Okay.
Mm.
Chile had gone left already, so capital had already begun fleeing. Brazil was teetering. It was like, well, we don't know really what. No, there was a whole lot of uncertainty. Argentina was just sitting there, and Argentina was the same as it had always been. So on a relative basis, we felt like Argentina had a certain level of upside purely as a consequence of capital flows that could come out of Argentina. Sorry,
Out of Brazil. Out of Brazil.
Out of Brazil. So that was what got us interested. And we said, okay, well, let's make this a fairly small allocation, and there is certainly asymmetry. So let's go into it. Subsequent to that, as things have transpired, obviously we watched the politics and everything else. Then I think we began to realize that the markets were indicating something other than purely just the Brazilian dynamic that was in play,
Right.
because that played out. Markets calmed down a lot, and Argentina for the year 2022 was together with offshore drillers, was our best performing sector within our portfolio. And by the way,
in dollar terms.
In dollar terms, yeah. And by the way, when we were doing it, we have some clients for our asset management business that are Argentinians, and they were going, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" Almost everybody was telling us, "This is nuts. We think this is crazy. What are you doing?" We said, "Just calm down. It's like 5% weighting, chill." And then, of course, that was easily our standout best sector for the year. Subsequent to that, we've had a little bit of pullback. And then, of course, now the elections that have just transpired this week, and everything's up. I mean, I think our positions are up about 30%. I haven't looked this morning when I've woken up, because it's 6 o'clock in the morning for me, so I haven't checked. But they've certainly moved now, and they've moved on the back of now a realization that whatever is coming in Argentina is highly unlikely to be what has existed in the past.
So on that note, so you've done very, very well, not just in the last week, but over the last couple of years. When I look at the elections, I listen to what the guy's saying, and obviously it all sounds great to me as a libertarian. Get the currency out of the control of the government, get rid of the central bank, reduce the size of government. All this sounds good long term. But then I look at, if you were to implement those strategies over the short term, there may be some serious economic pain. Like the example I used in a whiteboard video today was comparing the United States today with the United States back in the late 1800s, where in the 1800s, government spending as a percent of GDP was 5%. And now, let's just say it's 50% when you include state, local, federal. So if you were to slash the spending, government spending in the United States, I would be all for that. But people would have to realize that GDP over the next year or two is going to take a massive, massive hit before you can go ahead and kind of build up from that base. And then in 5 years, 10 years, you'll be far, far better off. But do you see it playing out that way? Or I don't know the political environment. I don't know the political structure in Argentina. So I don't know if he's going to be able to even implement any of these objectives that he campaigned on, or if he's just going to keep hitting dead ends. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's the big question. The big question is he going to be a Meloni 2.0? So when Meloni got put into power in Italy, she was talking about similar things to which Milei is talking about.
Oh, yeah, right.
And she's a complete lame duck. Nothing has been done. Now, part of that, you could argue, is as a consequence of the political structure, as you alluded to, whereby they can't necessarily get something done. Now, and look, in the political world, we're very familiar with politicians who come out and say certain things on the campaign trail, and then they don't actually ever manage to implement it.
Very unlike a politician, right, Chris?
I think in most instances that's the case of them simply having no desire in the first instance to implement what they've talked about. I think it's different with Milei. Time will tell, but to your point of GDP, I think GDP is a shitty method of kind of measuring something, for that very reason, that GDP includes your government spending. And you go, where does government spending come from? It comes from two factors. It either comes from taxation, which is a net drain on society, or it comes from deficit spending and basically debt. That in itself is a drain on society. So I think in an environment, if you were to do it in United States or some of these places, I think it would have a greater impact than it does or will do on Argentina. And I say that simply because the credit markets in Argentina are completely broken. They're only accessible at a government level, because the government's actually not even taking them on in a commercial sense, in that they're getting loans from the IMF who have zero interest in having them ever pay them back, because it's simply a political leverage tool utilized to subjugate countries, which is partly what Milei has been talking about, saying we've got to get rid of all of this garbage. At a commercial level, in terms of industry, people aren't utilizing credit there. Why? Because interest rates are like absolutely. I was talking with a friend down there just recently. If you're going to go get mortgages, you're looking at like 80%. Like, who's borrowing money at that? Like, you're not going to borrow money. So as a consequence, your private sector has already eliminated the whole credit component, because they can't function on that. Where credit is utilized, it's often utilized more of it. And I've seen this in Turkey at a domestic level, insofar as if you're going to go and buy a house, you're going to borrow from your auntie or your uncle, so it becomes almost like a community familial type of structure, at least with credit for things like homes.
And I would
So
assume that you borrow dollars. I mean, if I'm someone that's borrowing or lending, I guess not borrowing, but lending, if I'm the uncle and I'm lending to the kid, I'm probably going to lend them dollars, because I know that the seller is going to want those dollars. I mean, how much? I guess the question is, how much has the economy already dollarized?
exactly, and you make a fantastic point here. And I've seen a bunch of commentary on Twitter and things like this, where people are saying, "Oh, Milei's just going to come out and he's going to take this country, take Argentina, and basically put it in the hands of the Fed." Because just in case people don't know the backstory to this, one of the campaign messages that he's come out with is, he said, we're going to basically get rid of the local currency, destroy the central bank. He doesn't want a central bank at all. Use the US dollar, and go forward from that point onwards. Now, so there's some people are saying, "Oh, he's now just going to be a complete shill to the US and everything else." No, what he's actually said is that he doesn't believe there should be any currency. He said the Federal Reserve is just as shitty is a shitty institution. He's just said that the central bank in Argentina is even worse, and the country has already dollarized, right? All you're doing is you're removing friction. Anytime you remove friction, you get a net positive effect.
Right.
So if you think, like, if you and I were working in Buenos Aires, what we would do on a month, or say monthly basis, we'll earn in our pesos. We're going to then go and convert that at the end of the week or at the end of the month, or whatever the time frame is, into something of more tangible value, typically dollars. If we're looking for liquidity, maybe gold, maybe real estate, all sorts of other things, depending on how much money we've got. But the point is, we are just utilizing the peso because the government's forcing us to do so. And it is a friction, because as soon as we're getting it, we're trying to offload it. And then we're offloading it at massive margins, right? Because your central bank says, oh, the rate is X. But the free market's going, no, that's complete garbage. The rate is X plus Y. And so now we have arbitrageurs who come in, but they're charging us, to make that transaction. That's friction in the system that doesn't need to be there. So Milei has come along and said, why are we even pretending like we have it? Like, let's just get rid of the friction. And he's also said that there should be people should be free to choose whichever currency they want. He knows that they're going to use the dollar because he's not an idiot. He can look around him and everybody's using the dollar anyway. But his point is that the market should determine what money is. He's made that very, very clear. So as a consequence, now you have the Bitcoiners who are all going mad, and they're going, "Hey, this is amazing. Argentina is going to become the biggest Bitcoin country in the world." Maybe it is, maybe it doesn't. Doesn't really matter. We don't even need to determine what that is. We just need to let the market determine what the currency should be, and it will be fluid and it'll be flexible and it'll choose it. So I agree with them in that respect. But the point is, like, we're removing frictions from a system. I think that's highly product. It's very, very productive. It will also allow credit to come into the system.
Yeah.
Credit's not coming into the system at the moment because it has to go through all these fucking gatekeepers.
Yeah.
Um,
Who's going to lend it, right?
yeah.
And who's going to borrow
So
it at those interest rates, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you talk about frictions. I mean, one of the biggest frictions there would just be the fact that your inflation rate's 150%. So that's a pretty big friction right there. And just think about the logistics. And just if you were a store owner and having to change your prices like twice a day, just that in and of itself, think about how much of a pain in the butt that would be and how much time you would have to allocate to figuring out how much you're going to raise the prices. I mean, what math do you use for that? I mean, literally like 8 hours of your day as a business owner would revolve around just figuring out what price to charge and then
Well,
how to get
that's
that money to the bank, then how to turn that money into dollars. I mean, it's like a
you.
full-time job in and of itself.
You think about an average business. An average business that is a profitable business and does okay, it runs on about a 30% margin. Okay. Your 30% margin can swing by half purely as a consequence of your FX rate or your inflation.
Yeah.
So how many businesses have been put out of business, not because they're not good shoemakers or candle makers or whatever it is that they're doing, but simply because they've had been unable to manage that volatility of foreign exchange risk and inflation.
Yeah.
We don't know, but it's significant,
And the
and we can see it
businesses that
because
and the business I'm just using Turkey as an example because I haven't been to Argentina lately, but I have been to Turkey this year. And it's just the bottom line is what people do there and the businesses that survive is 90% of the transactions are settled in dollars. I mean, even the gal that I hired from the hotel to give me like a private tour of the mosques and whatnot, uh, she's I just paid her in dollars, and her hourly rate was in dollars. And
yeah,
so, to your earlier point, it's the pretty much the average Joes and Janes have already done this, but you're just eliminating the additional headache that they do have by having to deal at all with the Argentinian peso. And then what you're doing is you're just constraining the government and you're eliminating that inflation that some people had to deal with.
I think it's hard to actually conceive of how beneficial this can be because it's a flow through in the economy, right? It's one business that has the ability to now manage that inflationary risk, but it's all of their suppliers, it's all of the producers. It's like it's the entire daisy chain,
Yeah, right.
and so yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting exercise. It certainly needs to be done, so I'm all for it. What I think, and we put out a video about this on the 22nd, actually, just I think it was 22nd of last month. Anyway, I think we are likely to see a couple of things. The mainstream media is going to lose their minds. So we're going to see a barrage of negative media towards Argentina, towards the presidency, towards the economy, etc., etc. And at the same time, we will have real GDP contraction, right? If he does what he suggested he's going to do. And look, I don't think he's going to be able to do it on day one. But he's going to eliminate entire swathes of the bureaucracy. Just wipe them out. That's what he's promised. Again, time will tell whether that takes place or not. But if he does, certainly we're going to see a contraction in GDP, and there will be huge amounts of mainstream. So I think most of this is going to be very much narrative build around, oh, look at these numbers, and there will be, what's that saying? You can lie with statistics. We'll see all sorts of statistics coming out saying, look how bad it is. Much of those will be somewhat correct. The best way to lie is with a hint of truth. So they'll utilize a lot of things like GDP contraction, and they'll say, oh, this sector here no longer has funding, and the education system's
They'll sell it
broke.
as to this is why you need government. You see what
Yeah,
happens when you get rid of government? See, I told you, Chris, unemployment rate goes up, GDP goes down. So the answer is just more government. We'd have economic boom. That's
yeah.
the narrative spin.
So I think we're probably going to see 6 to 8 weeks of chaos. I'm kind of hopeful that we get that, because I'd like to get another crack at the at buying up some cheaper assets. Maybe it happens, maybe it doesn't. But certainly, if he does even half of what he suggests he's going to do, this is going to be, one could hope, a template for the rest of the world that can look at it and say, you know what, this is what we need. Because it's interesting. Argentina, since the Peronists came in, who destroyed that place, and that was what, 1946, I think it was. Juan Perón got in, and ever since then, it's just been like this downhill slide. And so, for years, you look at this and you think, what is wrong with people? Like, why do they keep voting in these socialists? What on earth is wrong with them? And they just keep doing it year after year. And now, of course, not only have they not voted in the socialists, but Milei won with, like, he cleaned up.
It was like 56%. Yeah,
It was
it's a rout.
a resounding vote for the policies that he has been suggesting. And it's not like he's been mild about it. It's not like he's sort of said, oh, well, we're going to get rid of a bit of socialism. No, he's like, well, no, we're torching the lot.
Yeah. No, he was campaigning with a chainsaw. I read.
Exactly.
Did you see that?
Yeah.
Just say, implying how he wants to cut government spending.
Yeah. 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 No, I mean, there's a lot of clips out there where he's, there's one where there's got a whiteboard up, and it's got all of the various government departments, and he's just grabbing them and just throwing them. He's going out, out, out. Just so, I mean, I would not want to be a bureaucrat in Argentina right now, because, you need to go and be productive and find a job, or create something, because they're all gone. Well, we can hope. So, I think that, again, when I think about this, it's a matter of actually taking away friction. So they're in the process of taking away friction. Certainly, I think there's going to be a lot of upheaval. There'll be angry people. There's going to be a huge media drive. The media hates him. And it's interesting. I was talking with a gent down there, and he said, in Buenos Aires, and this is just a few weeks prior to the election, there were big billboards up and everything around, the elections, but almost nothing for Milei. His campaign budget was very small. His campaign budget was very small. And so visibly, it didn't even look like he had a chance. But where he has succeeded largely is also on social media. So you could argue that his chainsawing wielding antics, going viral and things like that, were also partly a strategy. There were it wasn't, yeah.
Yeah, to create content for memes and whatnot.
Exactly. And certainly, I think he's done, to some extent, he did what Trump did, right? Trump didn't have the same budget as the Clintons did. But he utilized Twitter, remember, dramatically going into the 2016 elections. And to some extent, we've seen a similar dynamic to playing out in Argentina, where it's been social media that has been driving a lot of and look, you walk around the streets. Do people like stare at billboards? No, they're like this. They're walking like this anyway.
Yeah, right.
So, but the point is, there's been a resounding, endorsement of his policies, and so I think he's, if he can do even half of what he suggests he's going to do, it's going to be really interesting. At the same time, also, there's, as you've seen, Chile went left. Brazil is somewhat left now. In South America, you've seen increasingly countries going, even where you are in Colombia, it went left. Now, it's sort of a wishy-washy left to some extent, but this is a hard swing the other way. And so I wonder if in part a lot of the destruction of wealth that we've seen over the course of the last decade in places like Chile, certainly in Venezuela, and the refugees, for example, that flee these places. Not that there's refugees fleeing Chile, but there are certainly a lot of people now with more economic hardship in Chile than there were in the past. I wonder if a lot of that's waking up the region to some extent to the realities of socialism.
Yeah. Have you been following politics here at all in Colombia?
I have a little bit, as well as in I'm trying to think now of what's
So
that
they
woman's
just
name?
recently had local elections, and what 9 months ago or so, they elected Petro, just the crazy socialist guy who's
Mm,
buddies with or was buddies with Chavez and buddies with
yeah,
Maduro and Correa and all those knuckleheads. And everyone was very, very concerned. But we just had local elections like just a couple weeks ago, and I don't know what happened in other areas, but here in Medellin, they went hard right. They went hard right because Petro has pissed off a lot of people just in the short time that he's been president. And he's pissed off so many people that, to your point, now that they're just going the complete opposite direction. And, the president here had been right leaning for decades, something like 40, 50 years, something like that, long, long time. And so then they kind of went left with Petro. And now,
mm,
just after about 9 months, they're going, they're going straight back in the other direction.
yeah, yeah. It's interesting actually that narrative of right and left. Like I'm seeing the mainstream media down in Argentina go, and I think it was Bloomberg ran an article and Reuters ran one saying, a hard right wing guy's just been elected to president. I was like, he's not even right wing; he's libertarian. It's
Yeah, yeah.
completely different.
Oh, they
It's
they
completely
always do that, Chris. I follow the news so much on this channel, and what I've noticed is when a socialist gets elected, the mainstream media will never say they're hard left,
different.
never,
Yeah,
or far left. They'll never say
Marxist.
far left
Yeah, the
guy got
Marxist.
elected. But if someone's just kind of moderate, they'll say that they're far right, implying that they're somehow, close to being a Nazi or something like that, where you could have some guy that is literally a communist and they'll just say he's on the left. They'll never ever say far left.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'm hopeful that Milei is more like a Bukele, right? Um, and certainly what he's done in El Salvador has been phenomenal, um, both in terms of cleaning up the gangs, economic progress, you name it. It's such a tiny country. Most people don't even know about it, but it was coming off of a very, very low base.
Yeah.
But to some extent, Argentina is similar. It's coming off a very low base. It just has much, much more resources. It's a much, much bigger market. It's a much bigger economy. Um, but certainly ideologically, I think, though, if we're going to say what's in store for Argentina, I think I'm cautiously optimistic that it's going to be something like El Salvador, as opposed to what when the hard right Maloney got into power in Italy. And again, the problem with anything in Europe is that no matter who gets in power there, if you're utilizing the euro, you've lost control of your monetary system. And so Brussels uses that as a weapon against anybody who decides any recalcitrants who step out of line. They just cut off liquidity into your banking system. And so it's very, very difficult for any politician to actually implement anything of meaningful change in that structure, because they know, especially in a democracy, that if they reduced that risk or eliminated it, um, then there'd probably be a color revolution, or the austerity that would be brought because the cutting off of the liquidity in the banking system would probably bring about, rioting in the streets and things like that. It's just it's almost like it's too difficult to change things now that their entire monetary system is run by Brussels. Argentina doesn't have the same issue. It has similar issues with respect to debt to the IMF and everything else. But look, the way to pay back that debt is quite simple. Eliminate all the friction. Get rid of all of the waste. Get rid of all the friction, which is what they promised to do. I think he suggested he's going to eliminate 50% of the government this year, 50% next year, and on until as near as zero as possible.
But
And
I was
so,
thinking that through, Chris, and like in the United States, what really impacts the amount of money going to the government is capital gains. It's the stock market, it's assets, right? So I don't know what the structure looks like in Argentina, but let's just assume that it's relatively the same, where 60 or 70% of the money that's coming into the federal government is a result of capital gains. If they just kept their capital gains tax the same, didn't touch anything.
mm,
And even if the economy did go down temporarily and it kind of slumped, but just because of these policies that he's implementing, I would assume you'd have massive capital going into Argentina, to your point, which would raise asset prices, such as the stock market. And in turn, they might not even take a big hit to their tax revenue, even if their overall economy was declining for, let's say, a year or two, because the assets would offset that. Do you think that's a decent argument?
yeah, you bring up a good point, and the point is that looking at something isolated domestically, you can come to a certain conclusion, but nothing happens in a power vacuum. So just as I mentioned, the fact that we got interested in Argentina, partly as a consequence of what was happening in Brazil, right? It was like, so you, for example, you could have been looking at Brazil and going, oh, you've got elections coming up, and it's a bit contentious. People are really upset. Um, what's going to happen? There was even talk that the military were going to take over at one point, and it was all. You could have looked at that and said, "Oh, are we short? Are we long Brazil?" No. Step back and go, okay, if there's capital that's invested there, where else can it go?
Yeah, you got to look at the knock-on effects. That's
So,
right.
so you go and you look at the knock-on effect, and the knock-on effect was Argentina. Now, when you look at when you look at it like this, you go, what's the knock-on effect? Where else, George, in the Southern Hemisphere, can you reasonably invest with a dynamic which you could flip a coin, say 50% chance it doesn't work, 50% chance it works. But if it works, you get like a 5x return. If it doesn't work, you go to zero. It's still not a terrible bet, depending on your weighting of your positioning in your portfolio, right? You can put 5% into something. If it goes to zero, it goes to zero. But if it goes up 5 times, that's still not a terrible bet if it's a 50-50 probability. So,
Right.
on a broader scale, you go, where else can you invest? Like you've got, fine, you can go to, if you're looking at the Americas, you can go into Canada and you can go into America, North America. What do the valuations look like on a current comparative basis? They're wildly different. And then, of course, you've got elections coming up next year in the US. So that's going to be, markets don't like uncertainty, and we've got a whole lot of uncertainty coming over the course of the next 12 months. Then you go down to South America. What else you got? You got, in terms of large economies, you got Mexico. Mexico's nowhere near as cheap, but you could argue, okay, maybe Mexico's all right. What else? Brazil, Chile. That's pretty much it. There's nowhere else. Everything else is too small. Colombia's too small. Ecuador's too small. There's nothing in Latin America that's of any real size. What are you going to invest into? And so when you're looking at it from that dynamic, Argentina again starts looking more and more attractive.
All right.
So I think, and then if you see some of these policies like we've just discussed being implemented, I think it's reasonable to expect risk capital to look for something like that. Like when I used to live in the private equity world, you would look for a dynamic in the market that had that asymmetry to it, because you're a risk taker. That's what you are as a private equity or certainly venture capital. So you're going
Calculated
to have
risk.
a certain portion of capital, certainly within the emerging market world, that says, okay, we need an allocation to Argentina. And I think that that percentage of capital is going to be A, greater than it was in the past, and B, I also think that the weightings are going to change.
Yeah. So is this a long what's your time horizon on this play? You know, is it something where you're looking at it for the next holding your position or maybe adding to your position for the next 3 years, or is it more like a 10-year time horizon?
Yeah, so like I said, I alluded to before, I think there's a possibility we get a lot of narrative out of the mainstream media that's extremely negative. I expect
Mhm.
huge volatility. I mean, the markets literally yesterday morning, they woke up and they were up, depending on I think YPF was up about 17%, something like that. Um, that's not normal. You're not going to have that taking place all the time. So we're going to have a lot of volatility. Yeah, I'm just looking here. Yeah, so YPF, okay, YPF was up 41%.
What is YPF, Chris?
It's a state-owned oil, well, quasi-state-owned oil company, which Miele has promised to
Privatize.
privatize. Um, anyway, so my time frame on this is probably multi-year. That being said, I like to always let a market tell me where I should be, as opposed to trying to have. If you get these fixed mindsets and you say, I'm going to be in this for 2 years, or I'm going to be in this for 5 years, sometimes these things come along which you are no longer perceptive to, because you've already set in stone, oh, I'm in this for 2 years. That being said, I'm not trading. I'm not trying to dive in and out of this every 5 minutes, and it's not like that. I try not to take that approach. So it's probably a multi-year time frame. That being said, I'm going to let the markets tell me. Look, if we start seeing valuations which are similar to, I don't know, developed markets, then I'll certainly be taking money off the table,
Right, right.
because it is still Argentina.
Mhm. Yeah, and are you trying to focus on individual companies that might not have as much exposure to the domestic economy and maybe more exposure to something that you're longer term bullish on, say commodities? I mean, you use the example of that oil company, but is
Yeah,
that kind of part of your strategy as well?
yeah. Look, first and foremost, we tend to be very sector focused, right? We'll look at geopolitics and look at countries, but by and large, I'm interested in certain sectors. So YPF is an energy company.
Yeah.
That's why we're interested in it. So, like, I'm not running out and buying banks, for example. Although the banks are well, we have one bank with a very small weighting in it. But by and large, I'm after the same sectors that we are traditionally invested into in everything else. So it's energy, it's agriculture is actually a good one, because Argentina's um, it should be one of the massive powerhouses in the world of agricultural production, and it is, but nowhere near what it should be.
Right.
Uh, so agriculture, energy, those are the main sectors that we've been invested into.
Hmm.
There's other things like cement manufacturing and things like that, but by and large, those are yeah.
Yeah. So what would other than higher valuations, what would prompt you to kind of hit the eject button? What
Um,
make you look at your thesis, your bullish thesis, and say, you know what, I'm wrong. Now it's time to get out.
I think well, firstly, I think it's probable that we don't see the kind of what Miele what he said on his campaign trail and what he promised or what he suggested he's going to do, I think it's reasonable to expect that not all of that gets implemented as fast as he might want. I think he's genuine in his desire to do it, but the ability to do something is often much more difficult. So I think we could quite easily see a much slower process than most people are thinking. And in that, I think markets can get ahead of where things actually are. And in that environment, then I'll probably look to taking some money off the table. In terms of looking at something and saying my thesis is wrong, well, that's basically if Milo comes out and he turns out to be a Maloney and he doesn't do anything. The central banks are still there, the bureaucracies are still there, and he turns up to Davos and is the lead speaker. Then, all right, we were ahead.
He starts taking selfies with Klaus Schwab.
So, yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. All right, buddy. For those who want to find out more about what you do, where can they go check it out?
So we write a financial news publication, which you can find over at Capitalist Exploits. So that's just www.capitalistexploits.at, A for Apple, T for tomato. And for those people who wish to look at our asset management business, it is glenorchycapital.net.
Yeah. And we just found out about 30 seconds before we went live that Chris is going to be at Rebel Capitalist Live. I hadn't talked to him about it before, but I said, hey, you want to come? He's like, sure. So Chris is our newest addition to the speaker list at Rebel Capitalist Live. You can get your tickets at rebelcapitalistlive.com. And between, we got a Thanksgiving special, Chris. We didn't even know that. But yeah, if you go there right now, between yesterday and Friday, Gene, my digital marketing guy, is offering like $100 off. And so you get your early bird tickets, and that ends Friday. So if you want to see Chris live speaking along with Jeff Snyder, Mike Green, and a whole bunch of other awesome people, you can get your tickets at rebelcapitalistlive.com. All right, buddy. Enjoy the rest of your day. We'll see you soon.
I will do. Take care.